Hello and welcome to the classic Hollywood movie you should know. I'm Nate Washburn. This week the movie is from 1937, The Life of Émile Zola, starring Paul Muni, Gale Sondergaard, and Joseph Schildkraut, directed by William Dieterle. Now I wanted to do this film, The Life of Émile Zola, because during this time that we find ourselves in, our country is just rife with division. There's rise in fascism, neo-Nazis, white supremacy. There's this rise in anti-Semitic acts and violence. It's getting horrifying. So I wanted to talk about a movie that addressed anti-Semitism that was made in the 1930s. Now, The Life of Émile Zola tells the story of famed French author Émile Zola, obviously. He rose to prominence in the 19th century, writing these novels, writing these stories about the downtrodden. He was like a hero of the common folk. Then at the height of his fame and fortune, and what constitutes the second half of this film, Zola takes on what is known to history as the Dreyfus Affair that occurred in France in 1894 and 1895, where this French artillery officer, Alfred Dreyfus, was charged with treason. He was found guilty. There really wasn't any evidence. And what ended up becoming apparent was that he was railroaded due to rampant anti-Semitism in the French military at that time. And a lot of big-name people supported Dreyfus, but Zola was the most prominent, and famously, he brought it to the world's attention with this headline in the newspaper, "I accuse," where he went on the record with all these accusations against the French military and said, "You're going to sue me for libel. I welcome it. It will reopen this case." And that was the beginning of sort of the end for the Dreyfus Affair, because it came to light that Dreyfus was innocent. Zola led the charge on that. And this was a very gutsy move by Warner Brothers to produce this movie and release it in 1937. The 30s were a tumultuous time in the world. You had the Depression, you had the rise of fascism in Italy, you had Hitler coming to power in Germany, and Nazism. All this stuff was happening at the same time. But in the mid-30s, 1937, the war had not started. People were unaware of the horrors of Nazi Germany, and yet some people were able to foresee what was coming. I mean, if you think about it, in 1936, the Olympic Games were held in Berlin, and the United States attended and, paraded our Olympians in front of Hitler. This movie came out in 1937, the following year. This was a time when people were placating Hitler, thinking that he could be controlled. And recently, there's been several books that talk about the movie studios, the big studios during the 30s, and how they did not do enough to confront the Nazis, that they were too worried about profits. And for the most part, that is true. The one exception, though, is Warner Brothers, the studio that produced The Life of Émile Zola. In the 30s, one of the major markets was Europe, and Germany was a big consumer of Hollywood movies. Most of the studios didn't want to offend the German people and the Nazis, which in retrospect is the dumbest thing they could have done, but Warner Brothers didn't care. In 1934, President Harry Warner had his company end relations with Nazi Germany. He saw how bad Hitler and the Nazis were. And to a degree, there wasn't that much that they could do about it. At the time, the production code was the censor for Hollywood product that, dictated you couldn't show blood, you couldn't show sex. One of the tenets of the production code was, and I quote, "prohibition on depicting in an unfavorable light another country's institutions and prominent people." So you could not criticize the Germans, you couldn't criticize the Nazis, you couldn't criticize Hitler. The production code was run by Joseph Breen, who was a bit of an anti-Semite himself, and so he would not allow that to happen. The Warner Brothers kind of skirted that with this movie, with The Life of Émile Zola, because the main conflict in this, the second half of the movie, is the Dreyfus Affair, which this prominent figure was accused of treason because these higher-ups in the military were anti-Semites. There's been criticism of this movie that Warner Brothers didn't take it far enough because the word Jew, the word Jewish, is not spoken in this movie. But that got censored out. They had to cut that stuff out because of the production code. And yet they did sneak in, when Dreyfus is first the one suspected, they show his information, and there's a close-up of the document, and a finger, I'm going to show it right here, points to religion, Jew. So telling this story, taking on the Dreyfus Affair, was taking on anti-Semitism. And at the end of the film, after the Dreyfus Affair has been sort of put to bed, Dreyfus has been found innocent. Spoiler alert, Zola dies. I mean, it's the life of Émile Zola, so at the end of the film, he does die. During the eulogy for Zola, the character of Anatole France, shown here, played by Maurice Karnofsky, says, and I quote, "You who are enjoying today's freedom, take to your hearts the words of Zola. Do not forget those who fought the battles for you and bought your liberty with their genius and their blood. Do not forget them and applaud the lies of fanatical intolerance." That is a warning against Nazism. That is a warning against following these fascist leaders like a Hitler, like a Mussolini. That is what they are saying. And Warner Brothers was certainly rewarded making this film. It's a wonderful film, great performances. Paul Muni as Émile Zola gives a dynamite performance. And when the Oscar nominations came out the following year, The Life of Émile Zola was nominated for 10 Oscars. That was the most up to that point for any film. And it won 3, including Best Picture. That's how highly regarded this movie was at the time. And it's somewhat forgotten today, which is a shame, because it is a very good movie. And in an era when we are taking on white supremacy and fascists and neo-Nazis once again, it's one that should be watched. So do yourselves a favor, give a watch to The Life of Émile Zola from 1937. Best Picture winner, deals with anti-Semitism in a really interesting way. Highly recommended. It's this week's classic Hollywood movie you should know. I'm Nate Washburn. Keep watching.